you. Thank you, Paul. Why the heck did you have to do that before I have to talk again? I can't take it. Middle-aged man. It is an official syndrome from now on. Thank you so much. And it's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you've done for this event. And I think let's have another round of applause for Paul and the team being part of it. Thank you. You know, we're going to close today's program with a conversation on how patients are changing policy, whether it be regulatory policy or outcomes or legislative efforts driven by the patient community. And to share their thoughts, joining us today are Dr. Ken Anderson, who's the program director of the Jerome Lipper Multiple Myeloma Center and the LeBeau Institute for Myeloma Therapeutics at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Paul Giusti, who's the president and CEO of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. So how about a big round of applause for these gentlemen? And just to mix it up a little bit, we're going to change the seating arrangement. Is that working for everybody? I'm going to move into moderator mode. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. And you've both been involved in the research and treatment of multiple myeloma for many years. And it's also one of those disease areas where there's truly been incredible progress, especially in the last 5 years or so. You know, it's making multiple myeloma one of the most active areas of cancer R&D. How about if we open up, and around your opening statements, tell a little bit about your involvement prior to 5 years ago as well, and then maybe roll into a little bit about why the last 5 years has been so great from your individual perspectives, and then we'll circle back and we'll just have a dialogue. And folks, there will be some time for Q&A at the end. And we realize that we're the only thing between you and that cocktail reception. So we promise we're going to keep this wicked interesting, right? So why don't we start with you, Dr. Anderson?
All right. So thanks very much for the invitation to be here. I think that patients as our inspiration and the reason for everything we do is really what has been the impetus for all the progress in multiple myeloma. I've had the privilege of working on myeloma for almost 4 decades. As I like to say, I started when I was 13 years old. But in any event, there has been slow progress over the years, but really the big change has been, it's really not in 5, it's actually in the last 12 years. And we actually, who's counting, but if you count the 2 this year, we have 18 new treatments in myeloma in the last 12 years. And the reason that we have it is because there's a team in myeloma. Some of you know me, and I want to talk about teams. And we have a couple of pretty good ones in Boston right now. But the team that's beating myeloma is a really awesome special team. It's researchers and clinicians. It's industry and biotech. It's our regulators. It's the funders of research, whether it be the federal government or foundations. But most importantly, it's actually the patients who are the leaders and inspiration, as I say. It gets me to say that the reason things have happened so quickly in myeloma in the last 12 years is everybody's pulling in the same direction and organized and playing their position on this team. And honestly, it was in the 1996 or 1998, I guess. 96 was a diagnosis. In 1998, I was privileged to become involved with the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. And basically, that has started and actually blossomed into a catalyst to put all of these team members into place so that the progress has been fast-forwarded as a consequence. What I mean by putting the team members in place, I'll just tell you in real terms. You all know that to develop and make science count for patients, to develop a new biomarker, a new prognostic marker, a new therapy, you need to go from science to validation, to translating it to the clinic, the clinical trials, having patients involved at every level, but in particular being aware of the right trial at the right time, and then moving it forward towards the regulatory process and drug approval. And the MMRF, Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, has been involved in each one of those steps, funding basic research and clinical research, involved like crazy with the Multiple Myeloma Research Consortium, a group of centers that do clinical trials together with the translation. We've been very involved together with the FDA. I'm very fond of saying the FDA is your friend, and it's like saying the IRS is your friend. But I have to tell you, there's no truer words in terms of being proactive and helping patients. And then once, in fact, one gets a newly approved drug, that's when the work really starts. We have to get the word out to caregivers and patients alike, and we need to make sure that there's access to these new advances for all the patients. And so a patient-driven organization, Kathy Giusti started this foundation with her sister, Karen. I've been privileged to be, I guess I'm a lifetime board of directors member, but the point is, it really was and all is about patients. It was started about patients. It's still driven by helping patients. If you have to say what really made the progress happen, it's that focus, that unique focus, and also the discipline to actually create structures to allow each one of those steps to happen.
Oh, that's great. And you, Paul, first, why don't you start off by telling, you have the same name as Kathy Giusti.
Yes.
Is she your much younger sister or
Yeah.
something? What's your association?
Yeah, so I'll just tell you the personal story, but then want to talk about the points Ken was talking about the collaboration and how the organization was put together and how it works. But as Ken mentioned back, it was January of 1996 when my wife Kathy was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And at the time, there's no internet, there's no information that's available. We have a little 1-year-old baby girl. And we went, I can still remember sitting at the floor of a Borders bookstore and looking at the Merck manual, and there's this one paragraph about multiple myeloma. And it says that it's cancer of the bone marrow, that it's uniformly fatal, and that the average life expectancy is about 3 years. And that was in 1996. Now, I will tell you that Kathy is sitting in up in the corner here, is healthy, beautiful, doing great. And part of what she did, and as Ken talked about, is built this innovative model. Because now it's really been this, we talk about being involved in 10 new drugs in the last 10 years. That we're conducting we've conducted 70 clinical trials with 35 different compounds. That the 5-year survival has increased 40%, and there's a tripling of the lifespan of multiple myeloma patients. It's a very exciting, hopeful time. You say, well, how did that all happen, to what you were saying, Ken? And it really gets back to a culture of urgency. When you have a patient that's at the head of the organization, there's this enormous sense of urgency. There's no time to wait. And it gives you a lot of moral authority, if you would, to question things, say, why are we doing this? Why is this delaying? Why does this take time? Because you have to have that sense of urgency. And we look at the history of the MMRF, it's been about identifying obstacles and then finding solutions. Back 20 years ago, when this all got started, there was really no researchers doing anything. If you've been treated in 1996, you would have got the same treatment as 1956. Nothing had changed in 40 years. So we started by funding some basic research. Just kind of raised a little bit of money and started doing that. So that started generating some interest in the field. And then we found out, and so one of the speakers earlier today was talking about how important it is to have tissue, and that tissue for the researchers to use is just gold. So the MMRF set up a tissue bank that allowed researchers to have that had good laboratory practices, had standards set with it, so the tissue was available. The next thing was clinical trials were taking too long. And if you were Merck or Novartis or any of these companies, you'd have to go talk to Dana-Farber Cancer Center or the Mayo Clinic. You'd have to try to work all that out. It took a lot of time. And so Ken was very involved in this, and certainly Kathy, but setting up a consortium of academic medical centers that agreed to work together, to really break out of these silos that you have, to share information. That started at 4 centers. Now we have 22 centers that are available that share information, that look at what are the best practices and how do we get these clinical trials done quicker. And finally, the last piece is this COMPASS study that some of you have heard of. One of the next obstacles was that we could not generate enough data. And when I say data that's genomic data that follows in patients longitudinally, because this is incredibly important to follow what's going on with patients and patient outcomes. So we raised and undertook a $45 million study to follow over 1,000 patients for 8 years to watch their progress in multiple myeloma, both clinically as well as genomically. And that study is really the gold standard, if you would, in terms of data. And what's going on now, and as you look at the future a little bit, just to talk about that a little bit, Bob, is that the future really is all about data. It's about aggregating data, analyzing data. Really, it's more and more, certainly the science and the translational part is critical, but having that data available, and for us, building on the data in the COMPASS study. So that's kind of on the personal side where I got started, but then sort of taking it through to today, when we're looking at funding these studies, we're looking at the research, it's really just an enormously hopeful time in cancer.
What's new? What's exciting today? Is there any new news, and what's next? When you think about what's the most exciting and promising areas in your space, and keep in mind when you talk about that, how can we continue to engage the patient advocates and the advocacy organizations? You talked a little bit about how your organization from the beginning was engaged with what you were doing on a clinical and research level. That's so important because it pulled you towards it. So how are we going to continue to do that, and what's next?
So I will just say, I think there are many, many exciting areas, but two that everyone has heard about over and over again are precision medicine. You all know that as the right medicine for the right patient at the right time, and then the immune therapies. And I believe there are other exciting areas too, but those would be the two most promising areas in terms of really making a difference in patients' lives. Precision medicine in multiple myeloma is very complicated. There's a lot of abnormalities to start with, and then it gets worse with time underlying the ultimate relapse of the disease that occurs. But what is being done, and again, MMRF is leading this effort, we've been proud to be part of this, is to have coordinated clinical trials, whether it be for newly diagnosed patients or for relapsed refractory patients, where the genomic profiling that Paul referred to can be utilized to match the genomic fingerprint, if you will, or profile with a targeted agent that may be most likely to help. And what's innovative about this particular trial structure, whether it be in the newly diagnosed or relapsed refractory, is you try the new agent as a single agent, but as all you know, cancer is very, very evil and tricky, and combinations of drugs are going to be needed in order to really block the escape routes and really have a major impact. So in these clinical trials, whether it's in the newly diagnosed or relapsed refractory, we're going to start with a new agent that's targeting what we know is wrong in the circuit in the cancer cell. But then we can then add in the standard of care, so we will build a team or a combination approach in each area. And again, this kind of grew out of a genomics effort at MMRF, and also is completely related to the COMPASS trial, because now we know the heterogeneity. What are we going to do about it? The second area is the immune area. Happens to be my favorite, but it's my favorite because the immune system that we've all been God-given is potent, it is selective, and it's very adaptable. And in my opinion, it's probably one, maybe the only way that we're going to be able to outsmart all of the changes that cancer cells try to make to resist our therapies, be targeted or not. And there's a team of immune therapies. We have monoclonal antibodies. All of you know that they target the tumor, and the patient's own immune system is able to clear it. We have immunomodulatory drugs that upregulate the immune system, like lenalidomide, thalidomide, pomalidomide. We have checkpoint inhibitors that all of you know about in other cancers that basically take the brakes off of the inhibition that the cancer cell itself has, the downregulatory effect against your immune system. We have vaccines now in myeloma where we can stimulate in people their own immune reaction against their own cancer. And what's really exciting is if you put together combinations. So for example, if you put together a combination of a vaccine plus lenalidomide, you get an immune response and you increase it. If you put it together with a checkpoint inhibitor or an HDAC inhibitor, you get a memory immune response. Memory immune response is the holy grail. When we all get vaccinated to tetanus or polio or smallpox, we never get those diseases because our immune system remembers if we get exposed. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could vaccinate somebody with early stage cancer? We call it smoldering myeloma. And they get a memory immune response that makes it not possible for them to ever develop active disease. So these are very exciting areas. The final one I'll mention, because we're in Novartis's building, you will get hit by lightning if I don't talk about this. In particular by a certain Dr. Jay Bradner. There's something called CAR T cells, which you all know about, where immune cells are harvested from patients. They're genetically programmed to recognize a certain target on the patient's cells. In myeloma, the target's now called BCMA, but it's different in different cancers. Those cells are expanded outside of the body, and they're transfused back just as the patient's own immune army against their own cancer. And you've seen remarkable responses. Unfortunately, it's not the end of the story because there's side effects acutely and patients are relapsing. But it is yet another demonstration of the power of the immune system. It can literally deplete massive amounts of cancer cells. And as I say, if we can have a sustained response or have a memory response, I think that will be the elusive Super Bowl of cancer.
That's great. That's real exciting. How about you, Paul? What's new and exciting?
Well, first of all, I think that when Ken's articulating all the different ways to attack the disease, it gives a sense of the complexity. And when we talk about multiple myeloma is not just one cancer, but it's 10, 12 different types of cancer, types of multiple myeloma. So when you start thinking about that and you think of all the combinations and permutations and all these things of all this, it speaks to this very issue of data, of aggregating real-world patient data so that at some point, as Ken was saying, the promise of precision medicine is that at some point, if you're diagnosed with multiple myeloma, that you'd be able to take a look at your genetic profile and maybe the particular immune composition of your body and be able to say, well, based on that, we know that if we treat you this particular way, you'll have the best response, and that it's very targeted. And as Ken said before, the right drug at the right time to the right patient. So that's really the promise of precision medicine. We need to all, and when you think about advocacy organizations in particular, how do you help build data for your particular type of disease? And one of the things that we're doing, and I pulled my phone out, and Bob's a great moderator because he asked a very leading question, which I'll get to in a second, and that is this, that the COMPASS trial is the single largest genomic database in all of cancer. It's an enormous database. It's over half a petabyte of data. And what we've done, and this was just announced a couple of hours ago, was that we've taken that information, which has been in the public domain, and put it in the GDC, or the Genomic Data Commons, under the National Institute of Health. So I just want to make the point here, this is a press release that just went out today, and I'll just want to read one sentence from it, and it's from Doug Lowery, who's the NCI acting director, and he said, "Data sharing is essential to advancing cancer research, and I cannot overstate the value of the data that MMRF is providing, not only genomic data, but also full clinical data as well." And goes on from there about some other things. And I think this is really this is how we're going to start solving this problem, and this is how we're going to start letting the researchers really be able to start targeting this, because we aggregate enough data. So when you talk about the future, we talk about the future as being a future of data aggregation, of data analytics, and then certainly taking that, driving it to the clinic. I mean, ultimately, you have to have actionable insights that will be able to make things better for your patients. But it's really kind of interesting how this is going and how technology is going. And one other thing I'll mention is that one of the things that Kathy is working on, she's working with Harvard Business School through an initiative through Robert and Jonathan Kraft have funded. And what they're looking, one of the things she's looking at is, how do we take the best practices from other areas, from other companies, from other industries, and bring that to cancer? For example, now I can't say I've been on the website Rent the Runway very often, but I do know of it, and really what it is where you can, people can borrow clothes for, women can borrow clothes. I guess men could do it. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't think so, but
Don't tweet that.
Yeah, I was going to say, can borrow clothes for a, sorry about that, borrow clothes for a particular event. So now, but somehow or another, they're able to figure out, well, you know, you have your right size, it's the right event, it's the right shoes, it's the right everything, and put together to understand your buying behavior really is very deep. There's many, many data points on this that they analyze. And this is just to go ahead and get some outfit for a big event. And why can't we start taking some of that to cancer and to looking at how do we analyze some of this very complicated data? Somehow Amazon figures that out. Somehow some of these other commercial companies figure it out. But in the healthcare area, we're still behind in all that. So I think one of the things that's incumbent upon all of us is to look at the best practices outside of the healthcare arena, particularly in the state area. Kathy is is really leading the way in doing that and looking at what are the best practices across all industries, across all technologies. Let's bring that information, let's bring that learning, let's bring that to cancer research, because I think we'll get some insights and we'll figure things out much more quickly.
That is really exciting, and we'll get back to that. Do I have any questions from the audience yet? Anyone? Nothing? All right, we'll keep thinking about it. But one thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'm kind of going off script here a little bit, and just we've had so many interesting stories today. You know, I came into this industry working with the CF Foundation because I have a kid with CF, and I ended up here. Hearing your story and what you've done with your wife and turned it into a career, what made you want to do what you do for sick people? And what made you gravitate towards cancer and this particular type of cancer?
Yeah, so firstly, I've also had a fair amount of cancer in our family, including myeloma, but that came later. It actually dates back, I grew up in a small town called Auburn, Mass., which some of you may know. First rocket, Robert Goddard shot up the first rocket there on March 16th, 1926.
There we go.
There you go.
This is awesome.
Go Auburn.
Love it.
Could help you out in trivia someday.
Yeah.
They win a drink bet at a bar.
It evolved into the Goddard Space Center, so there you go. Anyway, so I wanted to be a small town GP. My mother was a nurse, and no one had even gone to college in our family. So I ended up going to college, and I ended up at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, again, thinking I was going to hang out a shingle and be a surgeon, to be honest. And I met my very first teacher at school there, a little short, which that bonded right away with me, right? But Richard Humphrey taught me right away that, you know, you can make science count for patients in laboratory experiments. You can do science and translate it into something, knowledge about the disease biology. How do we diagnose this and how do we treat it? And he taught me that you need to treat patients as family. And honestly, those two lessons are with me to this day. And so it really honestly grounds you every single day when you go to the clinic from where I have just come, not an hour ago. and see patients who come in who are looking to us, all of us, to work together, as Paul said, at an unprecedented level, because we have unprecedented knowledge nowadays. We just have to use it in a way where we can take this scientific knowledge and use from other fields, their technologies, their methodologies, et cetera, and bring it to the patient. And the reason it's so important is I've had the privilege of meeting patients like Kathy. There is no other patient like Kathy, but many patients who have been very successful in what they do and who, in their own personal tragedies, you have illustrated it with your, was it son?
Yes.
Yeah. You turn your own personal tragedies into the gift of hope and the gift of life for patients with not only the cancers or the illnesses that you have, but quite much more broadly. So it ended up, my father-in-law did get multiple myeloma, lived in our house, and in fact, unfortunately, died in our home. So I do have a very personal connection to myeloma as well. But I think the main lesson that all of this teaches us, in my view, is to remember the value of health, family, and friends. And when we go forward, as all of you have in various groups, to try in your own ways to help each other, when we together make an advance, it's forever. It's only going to get better. You started out this half hour by talking about, how come it's so much better recently, right? It's getting better because we're building. And I'll just say one quick thing about that. Myeloma patients live so long now because the initial therapies work so well, and we have therapies that work even when myeloma has the nerve to come back. People live for years. It's gotten so good, and I mean this, that again, the MMRF, and we've been proud to be part of this, is figuring out how are we going to continue this progress? How are we going to get new medicines in today's world? If you take a medicine as a newly diagnosed patient now and your progression-free survival is approaching 8 to 10 years, how are we going to develop a new drug if we wait 8 to 10 years and try to do 50% better than that? Some of us are going to be very old at that point, and patients can't wait. So the MMRF is leading an effort in our disease, for example, to get an earlier marker called minimal residual disease, fewer than 1 myeloma cell in 1 million normal cells, as a marker that you might look at 1.5 years that would predict for success at 10 years, so we can develop drugs with that endpoint. And it's really, it's so important to do that so that we can deliver on all of this new science, as we say. So I think, it's not hard to be inspired in our field. Some of us, like me, have been waiting a long time for the progress that's been happening. But it's so awesome to see, honestly, the level of collaboration that has been exemplified and created by MMRF, and all of the progress that has come as a direct consequence. And it's in having patients now for a long time. I just went to the birthday party of a 75-year-old woman who got a bone marrow transplant with me in 1988. There's not a much better gift, to me at least, than that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ken. I mean, we've talked about different diseases today. We've heard a lot about the excitement that's gone on in Duchenne muscular dystrophy with the Sarepta drug being approved, but that's going to take care of such a small percent of the population. You think about what's gone on with cystic fibrosis. We've had 2 drugs, 2 great breakthrough drugs that have been approved for the CF community. Unfortunately, they don't work for one of the mutations that my son has. So this disease foundation thing, right? And I loved what you said about building upon the success after success after success. And it almost seems like the more you do it, it almost gets better exponentially, right? Yep. And some of these younger disease foundations, and we've talked a lot about rare orphan diseases, and that's why we do this, so that the gold standards, the MMRFs, and the wonderful work that you've done for a couple decades is really, we're here to learn from it. So thank you so much for sharing that. Back to MMRF. How do you continue to every time you've had great news, and this story that he just talked about is enough reason to really celebrate, and no one would blame you if you know, hung up your shoes and said, okay, we're done. What keeps you going? Why don't you stop?
Well, it really goes, as much as we've loved talking about the successes, there's also just way too many patients that we know, we love, and we care about that lose or battle this disease in the prime of their life. We talk about the COMPASS study. It's studying about 1,200 patients that we were following, and these are all newly diagnosed patients. So and right at the time of their diagnosis, their genomic profile, we get the genomic profile, so we have that information. Now, there's good news with what's gone on with COMPASS, because what happened was it was originally a 5-year study, and to what Ken was saying, the patients were living so much longer than anticipated that it was extended another 3 years. And so our pharma partners re-upped for another 3 years to continue to extend that study. You say, wow, that's fantastic. You know, the people are living longer. The other side of that, we've had almost 200 of them that have died. Almost 200 of them have died out of this 1,200, roughly 1,200 sample. And again, these are people that are in the prime of their lives in many cases. They don't have other comorbidities, and they just go through, and you know, all of these new drugs that Ken was talking about, but there's still patients that just simply don't respond. And we don't know why. And so when you talk about it, I think that there's a couple of different things. Number one, can we push to a cure for people that have this disease? And part of it is trying to understand with all these new drugs, and you know, Ken was talking about all these new drugs. Just last November, December, we had this remarkable 15-day period in myeloma where we had 3 drugs approved in a 15-day period. 3 drugs approved in a 15-day period. That's never happened before in cancer. But now, well, what combination do you use them in? Because as Ken was saying, it's going to be combination therapies that are going to ultimately help extend these lives. And so what combinations, which dose, which order, all kinds of things like this. So there's a lot of learning to be done in that regard. So I look at it and say, there's a lot of reason for hope. There's a lot of promise when we look at this whole area of precision medicine, but clearly our job isn't done yet. And so that what motivates all of us that every day to work together, to work hard, and really to collaborate with our partners, that's really been a big focus. I'll just say one other thing to a lot of you that are so involved in in various diseases. The things I think that have helped us enormously at the MMRF, number one was the collaboration Ken's talked about. When you're patient-centric and you're the voice of the patient, and you have this opportunity to be a trusted third party, so that the patients trust you, the pharma companies trust you, the researchers trust you. You need to build that. You need to guard that like no other, because that's really your currency. So you're in a unique position to bring people together. So I think that's one thing. Secondly, look, the fundraising's important. It'd be great if you say, hey, you know, we're just wonderful and that's it. But one of the things that we've done, we've raised somewhere around $400 million for multiple myeloma research over the years from this orphan disease. But that's what it takes. And that's a lot of what Kathy and her team that preceded me that have done. And we've worked very hard to do that. And the third thing is to engage patients and engage them in the research effort. So more and more, you know, we've heard about this, you know, Bob, you were talking about it, Ken, that patients have to be engaged. They can't, this model where a patient is just sitting there listening to what the doctor says and they say, okay, well, that's fine. They need to be informed. They need to kind of continue to push the information, but they need to be engaged in clinical trials and other things. It's something less than 5% of all patients are in clinical trials. All cancer patients are in clinical trials. So those are the things that, you know, when you talk about some of the things that we've done that I think have been helpful, but I just encourage everybody, big picture, that between those 3 things, I think it really helps put you in a position where you can really try to advance research in your particular disease area.
We're coming up on the end of our time. Ken, do you have anything that you want to wrap up? Anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I just would say in this crazy world in which we live, and if you don't believe that, just think of what happened a couple of nights ago on television. You can watch again tonight if you missed it.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to thank everybody here for each in your own way working on all kinds of diseases. Because, as Paul said, that we're focused for us, the number one enemy is multiple myeloma. But the truth is what can be learned in this setting is very useful in cystic fibrosis and other settings. Mm-hmm. And certainly what you're learning in your individual areas is really going to help us. So I think fast-forwarding progress is from working together, and we're doing it for patients as long as we keep that focus, which is really the sweet sauce of the MMRF. But keeping the focus on the patients will always keep your compass and your direction true.
Yeah, and I want to thank both of you for joining us today and for all that you do. This is a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I want the record to reflect that Paul Giusti and Dr. Ken Anderson are both #patient-driven. Okay? That's what we've been tweeting all day. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.